Iran is mocking Trump with claims that large numbers of U.S. soldiers are resigning or losing morale at Middle East bases. Claims of a U.S. troop shortage are now being used to question whether military strain was a real factor behind Trump's decision to accept a truce with Iran. Iranian security-linked messaging is also pushing the idea of a crisis at U.S. bases, revealing signs that Trump is edging toward strategic defeat. At the same time, questions about the effectiveness of the Hormuz blockade are adding to the pressure narrative, with analysts warning that the blockade may be failing. IRGC intelligence said on April 14 that frustration and hopelessness are spreading among U.S. troops in the region, presenting the claim as a sign that repeated Iranian attacks have taken a psychological toll on American forces. The IRGC attributed that alleged drop in morale to Iran's repeated missile and drone strikes on U.S. military bases across the Gulf, arguing that the sustained attacks have disrupted both confidence and battlefield readiness. Iran International reported that the IRGC made this revelation on the basis of what it described as assessments and field data, giving the claim the appearance of an intelligence-backed internal reading of U.S. conditions. Iran's IRGC intelligence said, and I quote, "Despair and frustration are taking a heavy toll on U.S. forces in the region. Intelligence assessments and some field reports on the condition of U.S. forces in the region suggest that a deep and significant sense of frustration and hopelessness has set in among them. According to these reports, several factors are driving that mood: the repeated and effective strikes by Iranian missiles and drones on military bases, officials in Washington brushing aside field reports and on-the-ground data, constant redeployments, living under unstable conditions, and repeated changes in plans ordered by the President and the Defense Secretary. In just the first month of the war, around 734 resignation or discharge requests were reportedly submitted from bases in 3 Persian Gulf countries. Field assessments indicate that the situation appears to be much the same in other countries across the region. These departures span every level, from senior commanders to the lowest ranks. At the same time, senior military commanders say that under orders from the Defense Secretary, the loss of soldiers is not considered a red line. What matters most is preventing commanders and troops from being taken captive." Unquote. The revelation came at a time when reports were also questioning the effectiveness of the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports, adding to the wider narrative that Washington's pressure campaign is facing visible strain. A Chinese tanker sanctioned by the United States sailed through the Strait of Hormuz on April 14, marking a striking development amid the new maritime standoff in the Gulf. The vessel passed through Hormuz despite the U.S.-imposed blockade, according to ship tracking data that showed it successfully made the transit out of the Gulf. Reuters made the claim about the vessel Rich Starry, citing tracking data from LSEG, Marine Traffic, and PLR to document the ship's movement through the strategic waterway. According to the same data, the Rich Starry would be the first ship to make it through the strait and exit the Gulf since the blockade began. Notably, both the tanker and its owner, Shanghai Xianrun Shipping Company, Limited, are under U.S. sanctions, making the passage especially politically sensitive. Reuters reported that sanctions on the Chinese-linked company were imposed because of its dealings with Iran, placing the vessel in the wider network of trade restrictions tied to Tehran. The Rich Starry is a medium-range tanker carrying about 250,000 barrels of methanol, according to the shipping data cited in the reports. The vessel loaded that cargo at its last port of call in Hamria in the United Arab Emirates, adding another regional link to the ship's voyage. Reuters also reported that the Chinese-owned tanker has a Chinese crew on board, based on the available vessel data. An Iranian embassy statement described the Rich Starry as a Malawi-flagged tanker, adding another detail to the growing attention around the ship's transit. Iranian embassy in Ghana wrote on X, and I quote, "Breaking, Rich Starry, a Chinese oil tanker sanctioned for shipping Iranian oil, flying the flag of Malawi, a country with no coastline, just sailed through America's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz." The Navy, with its many big beautiful ships, issued repeated warnings. Reportedly, the tanker's captain upgraded to premium to skip the ads. Edit. We're being told the blockade only applies to countries the US isn't afraid of. That list used to be long. It now fits on Trump's McDonald's receipt, delivered by DoorDash. Unquote. Tensions in the Strait of Hormuz appeared to escalate on April 13 when the United States imposed a naval blockade targeting Iranian shipping, following the failure of prior diplomatic talks. Despite the newly enacted U.S. blockade, an oil tanker successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz, according to reports from U.S. military sources monitoring the waterway. The partially loaded oil tanker named Elpis managed to cross the strait on April 13th, as detailed in a CNN report covering the incident amid heightened restrictions. The Elpis vessel reportedly cleared the narrow waterway without incident, even as the US blockade was actively in place against Iranian-linked shipping traffic. The Elpis had been previously sanctioned by the United States due to its alleged connections to Iran's shadow oil trade network operating outside official channels. This transit occurred shortly after President Trump's announced blockade was set to begin, marking an early test of the enforcement measures in the strategic choke point. The development was reported by Iran International, which cited a CNN report confirming the tanker's passage through the restricted area. On April 14th, Vice President J.D. Vance, who led the negotiations, said no deal was reached because Iran refused to accept the U.S. terms put forward in the talks.
I think some people, their reaction to this is to say, well, he shouldn't have said that. And look, there are certainly things that the Pope has said in the last few months that I disagree with. Let me just take one very concrete example related to this conflict in Iran. So the Pope said something where he said, and I'm going to try to remember the exact quote, but he said that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. I'm pretty sure that he said that exact statement. Now, on the one hand, again, I like that the Pope is an advocate for peace. I think that's certainly one of his roles. On the other hand, how can you say that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated France from the Nazis? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes, and I agree. Jesus Christ does not. I agree. Jesus Christ certainly does not support genocide. I think it's very, very important for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology. And I think that one of these issues here is that there has been, again, hey, random dude screaming, I told you I'd respond to your point. I just want to respond to this question first. But I think one of the issues here is that if you're going to opine on matters of theology, you've got to be careful. You've got to make sure it's anchored in the truth. And that's one of the things that I try to do. And it's certainly something I would expect from the clergy, whether they're Catholic or Protestant. Now, to respond to this guy here, he said, I believe he said the administration supports a genocide in Gaza. And here's my response to that. When we came in, the humanitarian situation in Gaza was an absolute catastrophe. You know who's the person who got a peace agreement in Gaza? Donald J. Trump. So if you want to complain about what happened in Gaza, so if you want, sir, to complain about what happened in Gaza, why don't you complain about Joe Biden and the last administration? We're the administration that solved that problem. The president, excuse me, sir, right now, you see more humanitarian aid coming into Gaza than it has any time in the past 5 years because we have taken that situation seriously. And that's one of the things that I'm proud of about our administration is whether it's there or Thailand and Cambodia, we have consistently tried as much as we can to solve these problems, not just complain about them like the guy who just ran away angry.
One question is, when you looked across from these Iranian negotiators, what did you make of them? Did you get the sense that they really were the right people? I mean, I'm assuming you guys know this type of thing, but...
Yeah, I mean, look, you never know. The United States had never had meetings at that level with the Iranian government in 49 years.
Wow.
Like it's a meeting that had never before happened. Not Democrat, not Republican. We had never had a meeting like that where you have, the person who's effectively running the country in Iran sitting across from the Vice President of the United States. That had never happened. And what look, honestly, after 49 years, there's a lot of course, mistrust between Iran and the United States of America. You're not going to solve that problem overnight. But yeah, I think the people we were sitting across from wanted to make a deal. And I know the President of the United States told us to go out there and negotiate in good faith. That's what we did. That's what we're going to keep on doing. So you never know, though. But here's where we are on, fundamentally, the President set a policy. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and right now we are negotiating to make sure that very thing happens. And here's, what's interesting about this is, what's interesting about this is that we have this ceasefire that's in place. I think it's 6 or 7 days old. Right now, the ceasefire is holding. And what you're seeing is what the president wants to make, he doesn't want to make like a small deal. He wants to make the grand bargain. And what he's basically offering to Iran is very simple, and frankly, it's something that no president has had the ability to offer. He said that if you're willing to act like a normal country, we are willing to treat you economically like a normal country. He doesn't want a small deal. And that's one of the reasons why, one, I'd say in Pakistan, we made a ton of progress. But the reason why the deal is not yet done is because the president, he really wants a deal where Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, Iran is not state sponsoring terrorism, but also the people of Iran can thrive and prosper and join the world economy.